What if I told you that the biggest obstacle in your life isn't your past, your failures, or the people who didn't believe in you? It's you. And before you shut down and say, "Great, so I'm the problem," keep listening, because this is actually the most empowering thing you could ever realize. See, most people go through life believing the mountain they're trying to climb is out there somewhere. The economy, their parents, their circumstances, their lack of talent, their bad luck. But here's the twist nobody prepares you for. The mountain is not out there. The mountain is you. Your fears, your patterns, your coping mechanisms, your need to feel safe, your refusal to let go of who you used to be. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because if the mountain is you, then you are also the climber. But here's where it gets interesting. People love to say they're self-sabotaging, like it's some kind of personal flaw or moral failure. But Brianna Wiest argues something radically different. There's no such thing as true self-sabotage. What you call sabotage is actually protection. Think about that for a second. If you procrastinate, if you freeze, if you sabotage relationships, if you quit right before things get good, you're not doing it because you're stupid or lazy. You're doing it because some part of you learned, somewhere along the way, that success, intimacy, visibility, or change could hurt you. Your brain isn't trying to ruin your life, it's trying to keep you alive. It doesn't care if you're fulfilled, it cares if you're safe. But here's the catch. Safe and happy are not the same thing. And a lot of people spend their entire lives choosing the first one by default. Now here's the question that changes everything. Safe from what? Safe from rejection? Safe from disappointment? Safe from failure? Safe from outgrowing people who won't come with you? Most people never pause long enough to ask that. They just assume the fear is the truth. But the fear? It's just old programming trying to stay relevant. And here's where the story turns into your story. Because if you're listening to this, chances are you felt that strange tug of war inside you. The part of you that wants to grow, and the part of you that wants to hide. The part of you that wants more, and the part of you that says, "But what if we lose everything?" That conflict is not a character flaw. It's a sign you're standing at the base of your mountain. Now, wait till you hear this. There's a question in the book that hits like a truck. Wiest says if you want to understand your self-sabotage, don't just ask, "What am I doing wrong?" Ask, "What need is this behavior protecting?" Because every destructive pattern makes perfect sense when you understand the need beneath it. Perfectionism protects you from failure. Avoidance protects you from disappointment. People-pleasing protects you from abandonment. Pride protects you from vulnerability. Staying small protects you from being seen. Once you realize that, the shame dissolves. Suddenly you're not a screw-up, you're someone who learned how to survive. And here's where the hero's journey begins for you. Because survival got you here, but survival won't get you where you're going next. Growing requires a different set of tools. It requires questioning the very beliefs that kept you safe before. It requires asking uncomfortable questions like, who would I be without this story? What am I afraid will happen if I change? What version of me is my future self begging me to let go of? But there's one line in the book that people highlight, screenshot, tattoo on their souls, because it reframes everything. Your new life will cost you your old one. And that sentence sits heavy because it's true. Growth costs comfort. Healing costs familiarity. Self-respect costs approval. Expansion costs predictability. Becoming who you're meant to be costs who you were trained to be. No one talks about that part. We romanticize transformation like it's all epiphanies and mountain peaks. But the real work of change is messy, confusing, and sometimes lonely as hell. But stay with me, because the next part is where it gets real.
So let's talk about the part nobody likes to admit. We say we want change,
But we cling to our old life with both hands. Why? Because the old life has something the new life doesn't yet. Certainty. Certainty is addictive, even when the certainty hurts. You know what pain feels like. You know what being stuck feels like. You know what settling feels like. There's comfort in the familiar. Even suffering becomes a routine if you stay in it long enough. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't stay stuck because change is too hard. They stay stuck because change is too uncertain. Uncertainty threatens the ego. It threatens the identity built on survival. And Wiest hits this point beautifully. Self-sabotage isn't a war against growth. It's a negotiation between your past self and your future self. And the past self is stubborn. The past self says, don't risk it. Don't fail. Don't be seen. Don't lose control. But the future self whispers, if you only knew what's waiting on the other side. Here's where the journey gets interesting. The subconscious contract. Wiest uses this idea that you have subconscious commitments, invisible contracts with yourself that define who you believe you're allowed to become. You can spot them by completing this sentence. I want, but. I want success, but I don't want the pressure. I want love, but I don't want the vulnerability. I want change, but I don't want discomfort. I want freedom, but I don't want uncertainty. There it is. The second half of the sentence is the contract, and the only way to evolve is to rewrite the contract. But here's where it gets real. Most people never challenge those contracts because they assume they're facts. They assume the mountain in front of them is fixed, immovable, absolute. But Wiest pushes a radical idea. Your mountain is made of things you can change. Not overnight, not perfectly, but inevitably, if you take responsibility for the climb. Now, let's shift gears. The price of staying the same. There's a moment in every transformation where you finally wake up to one brutal realization. Not changing is also a choice, and it has a cost. People think change is scary, but staying the same has its own kind of terror. The terror of regret. The terror of wasted potential. The terror of asking, what if I had tried? You'll notice something strange. The pain of growth is temporary, but the pain of avoidance never ends. It just loops. Here's a quick pattern interrupt. Ever notice how you'll suffer for years to avoid 10 minutes of discomfort? Wild, right? We'll avoid a difficult conversation for months. We'll stay in the wrong relationship for years. We'll put off a dream until it dies in our imagination. Not because we're incapable, but because we're uncomfortable. But here's the plot twist. Discomfort isn't a signal to stop. Discomfort is the signal you're finally moving. Wiest describes it like a transition between identities. There's the old self you're shedding and the future self you're building. And between them, the void. The void feels like confusion. It feels like nothing is working. It feels like being lost. But in reality, it's the space where everything is reorganizing. If your life feels like you're between versions, congratulations. You're in the part most people quit at. And here's where the cliffhanger comes in. Because now we have to ask the question that turns pain into power. What is your pain trying to teach you? Wiest argues that pain isn't punishment. Pain is feedback. Pain is information. Pain is a compass pointing you towards something unresolved, unexpressed, or undeveloped. You're not just hurting. You're being summoned. And your job, if you want to stop self-sabotaging, is to decode the summons. Because here's the uncomfortable revelation. Your pain has a purpose. It's not random. It's not meaningless. It's not just suffering for suffering's sake. It's data. But wait, the next part goes even deeper, because we're going to break down what pain is actually trying to signal, and how to use it as momentum instead of a prison.
Let's pick up right where we left off, with the idea that pain is information. But information about what? Wiest breaks it down simply. Pain points to the part of yourself that is asking to grow, not because you're weak, but because you're ready. Think about it. Confidence doesn't grow in situations where you already feel confident. Strength doesn't build in places you're already strong. Clarity doesn't come from moments that are already easy. Every trait you admire in people was forged in friction. So when something hurts, deeply, consistently, repeatedly, that's the mountain calling your name. Now, here's the twist most people miss. Pain also reveals what you care about. We don't get devastated about things that don't matter to us. We get devastated about the relationship that didn't work because love mattered. We get devastated about the job we aren't thriving in because purpose mattered. We get devastated about the dream we haven't pursued because meaning mattered. Pain is the smoke signal for meaning. And now we get to the next layer. Self-sabotage as protection. Wiest argues something profound here. Self-sabotage is not self-hate. Self-sabotage is self-protection. Your subconscious isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to shield you from disappointment, embarrassment, rejection, danger, uncertainty, loss. But here's the catch. When the mind protects you based on old danger, you get stuck in old patterns. Example: if you learned at age 10 that speaking up gets you punished, your adult self will avoid advocating for yourself at work, not because you're weak, but because you're conditioned. If you once loved someone deeply and they left, your adult self becomes emotionally distant, not because you don't want connection, but because connection feels dangerous. Once you see that, everything changes, because patterns that feel irrational suddenly make perfect sense. And here's the attention reset moment. Imagine discovering that your flaws are actually outdated safety strategies. Kind of takes the shame out of it, doesn't it? Now, let's talk solutions. Because Wiest doesn't leave you in analysis, she pushes you into transformation. The reframe. Growth as safety. The turning point in the book, and the hero's journey, is when your subconscious finally learns that growth is no longer a threat. It's an upgrade. Wiest suggests asking two powerful questions. 1. What is the fear behind my behavior trying to protect? 2. How can I meet that need without self-sabotaging? Example: if procrastination is protecting you from failure, then the need is safety. Solution: build micro moments of success so failure feels less catastrophic. If perfectionism is protecting you from judgment, then the need is acceptance. Solution: practice being seen in low-stakes environments to show the brain it's survivable. If avoiding relationships is protecting you from heartbreak, then the need is emotional security. Solution: learn boundaries that create safety instead of isolation. See the pattern? Real transformation doesn't come from willpower. It comes from upgrading the strategy. Now let's take it even deeper. The identity shift. Every major life change goes through a subtle identity shift. You aren't just quitting a habit. You are letting go of a version of yourself. The version who tolerated less. The version who stayed small. The version who chose numbness over risk. This part of the journey hurts
because you're not just losing behaviors, you're losing identities that once kept you safe. Wiest describes it almost like a funeral. You grieve an old self, one you outgrew. But here's the cliffhanger, the part people aren't prepared for. Letting go of who you used to be makes space for who you're becoming. It's the transition between, "I'm not ready yet," and "I can't stay here anymore." Between, "I don't know how," and "I'll learn as I go." And that brings us to the next breakthrough, a chapter that flips the script on emotional pain entirely and reveals how it becomes power.
So now we arrive at the final stage of the journey, the summit of the mountain. This is where Wiest introduces one of the most underrated truths about growth. Emotional pain hardens into wisdom. At first, emotional pain feels pointless. It feels chaotic. It feels unfair. But with time, and only through awareness, pain becomes pattern. Pattern becomes insight. Insight becomes wisdom. And wisdom becomes the advantage that future you stands on. Think about almost any breakthrough you've ever had. It probably came after discomfort, not before it. Which brings us to the concept Wiest quietly champions throughout the book: future self-leadership. Instead of asking, "How do I fix myself?" ask, "Who am I becoming? And what does that version of me need today?" Your future self has already climbed the mountain. They have already survived the things you're scared to face. They already know what matters and what doesn't. So the work becomes simpler and more empowering. Borrow their confidence. Borrow their resilience. Borrow their patience. Borrow their standards. That's how you collapse the gap between who you are and who you're meant to become. And if that idea feels abstract, let's make it practical. Ask yourself quietly, if the version of me who made it was guiding me, what would they tell me to do next? You'll be surprised how often the answer is both obvious and uncomfortable. Which leads to the next revelation. Purpose doesn't remove pain, it redefines it. One of the biggest myths in self-development is that healing leads to an easy life. It doesn't. It leads to a meaningful one. Pain doesn't disappear, it changes jobs. Instead of being the thing that stops you, pain becomes the thing that teaches you, shapes you, sharpens you, and prepares you. When Wiest talks about mastering the mountain, she isn't talking about becoming invincible. She's talking about becoming capable. Capable of feeling hard things without collapsing. Capable of starting again without losing hope. Capable of loving without demanding guarantees. This is where everything clicks. Self-mastery isn't control, it's capacity. That's what gives pain its purpose. Now, what happens after the mountain? Self-trust, the real reward. When most people imagine success, they picture confidence. They picture clarity. They picture momentum. But the real prize is quieter. It's self-trust. Because once you trust yourself, you become unstoppable in a way that doesn't look dramatic, just consistent. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop apologizing for wanting more. You stop needing outside permission. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop abandoning yourself when things get hard. Self-trust is what makes life feel possible again. Wiest ends the book with a form of gentle encouragement that resonates long after the pages close. You don't climb the mountain to prove you're strong. You climb it to see who you are without the weight of what once held you back. Now let's finish with the message that ties the entire journey together. Your pain has a purpose, but it's not to break you. It's to reveal you, to shape you, to prepare you, to wake you up, to align you with the life you were meant to live, not the one you settled for. Most people stop at the discomfort. They take the pain as a verdict. But pain isn't a verdict. It's an initiation. It marks the beginning, not the end. So if you're in the middle of your climb right now, here's the reminder you may need most. You're not behind. You're not late. You're not broken. You're becoming. And becoming is messy. Becoming is uncomfortable. Becoming feels like tearing down walls you once thought were structural. But becoming is also sacred. Because once you become, the mountain that felt impossible becomes the ground you now stand on with confidence. And the view from the summit? That's where you realize the life you were chasing was never out there.
It was always inside you, waiting for you to rise to meet it. Take a breath. Take your next step. Your future self is already cheering you on. If this hit home, don't just scroll. Hit subscribe and keep climbing.